My name's Matt. This is my co-founder Alice, and 3.5 years ago we started EF because we think that starting a startup is the most rewarding and exciting career choice you can make, and we wanted to make it easier for the best technical talent in Europe to start a startup at the start of their career. We're based in London. And we recruit people from all over Europe. It's our first time in Paris though, so we're very excited. And today what we want to talk about is the 7 deadly sins of startup founders. And what we mean by that is the 7 mistakes that we see most commonly in the people that come and work with us. But a bit of background first. What EF stands for Entrepreneur First, and what we care about is finding great talent and then working very intensively with that talent to help them start companies. We think that in Europe, unlike in Silicon Valley, for too long it's been really obvious that if you're young and you want a job, then really you need to go work for someone else. Maybe you should go work in a bank. Maybe you should do what Alice and I did and go work in a management consultancy. Maybe you should go work for a huge company. And actually we think that those jobs, particularly if you have a technical skill, are not only unexciting, not only potentially soul destroying, but they stop you from actually achieving your full potential. So when we started EF, people actually thought it was crazy because we said we were going to do something really unusual. We're investors, that's what we do, but we said that we weren't going to invest in companies, we were going to invest in individuals. And that when people came to us looking for support, we weren't going to say, have you already got a team? Have you already got an idea? Have you already got a product? Have you already got customers? Instead, all we were going to ask was, how smart and how ambitious do we think this individual is? And if we like them and we think they meet that bar, we're going to support them. And we'll help them build that team and find that idea and build that product while they're with us, not expecting them to already have all that. So we told a lot of people this, and we went out to try and raise some money for this idea so that we could get started and quit our jobs and open an office and all the things that money is needed to pay for. And no one would give us any money because they thought it was a stupid idea. But fortunately, well, we spent about 3 months just paying for everything on our credit cards, which was very scary. And then eventually we managed to get some big companies who didn't realize that our mission was to destroy them, to pay sponsorship. And the sponsorship allowed us to get going and take on the first people. And actually, it turns out that people should have given us money because over the last 2 years, we've taken 60 people, and between them, those people have started 20 companies, and those companies are now worth $100 million. The oldest of those companies is 2 years old. So this is very, very rapid growth in value for these companies. And this is just the start. We currently have another 20 companies with us, started by another 60 individuals, and we think these ones are even more exciting. They're exploring ideas across the whole range of what's possible in technology. This year we have companies working on artificial intelligence, we have companies working on video compression, companies working on virtual reality, Bitcoin, you name it, there is someone at EF building a company based on that technology. In the past, we've had drones, we've had robots. We're interested in finding the most interesting, most disruptive technology and funding it. So what that means is that we've really started to see a lot of people do really well. But we've also seen a lot of people make a lot of mistakes. Because for every 3 people that join the program, typically only 2 end up successfully having a company and 1 doesn't make it. And so rather than focusing just on successes, which can make it all seem all too easy, what we wanted to talk about today was a little bit about the failures, and not about the people, but about what are the common mistakes that we've seen building 40 companies over the last 3 years. Alice is going to kind of take over and walk through the first of those, but I just want to kind of explain our point about why this might be a good idea. One thing we believe, and the reason that we came to 42, is that too often people think that, you know, people put you in a box if you're a computer science person. They say, oh, you're the tech guy. Go stand in the tech corner. You can't build a business. At EF, we only take people with tech backgrounds. EF isn't about business guys and tech guys. It's about people who love building stuff. And so the entire point of this talk, and what I hope comes out over the course of this talk, is that actually when you leave 42, you're going to be in as strong a position as anyone, not just to build great technology, but to actually build a company out of that technology. And we think that actually the start of your career, either as your first job or your second job or your third job, is a really great time to do that. So I'll hand over to Alice, who will kick off telling us a little bit about the mistakes that we've seen. You've got one. Great.
Go on. Hi guys. So as Matt said, over the last 2 years, well now 3 years, we've worked with more than 120 different people. And whatever mistake you can imagine, we have seen it in some form, probably multiple times. I think that often when you read about startups or when people talk about startups, they make two assumptions. They assume you're in a team, and they assume you have an idea, and they assume you know what product you're going to make. Often those things aren't true. Those things are not the easy bit. They are often the really, really hard bit. So we like to think of ourselves as experts in the first 200 days of a startup's life. So either going from one individual who needs to find a co-founder who has a vague idea but nothing really concrete, or two people together who don't have an idea, or one person who has a very strong idea of what they want to do but no one to do it with them. So we've seen the full kind of spectrum of what super early stage can look like. And a lot of what we're about to talk about now is based from those experiences. So, error number one, treating founding like a checklist. So how many of you want to start a startup? Good, well, we've got the right kind of audience then. And how many of you have actually started a startup of some sort? Oh, far fewer hands, far fewer hands. This is one of the problems that we hear again and again and again from young founders, which is, I will start up one day, I just need to get experience, connections, a network, a co-founder, a product, I need to get better technically, I need to learn this new language, and it's this endless checklist that you're never going to complete. You will never, ever feel ready to start a startup. Because starting a startup is probably the scariest, the most idiotic thing you can do. There is never a rational time to start a startup. It will always be irrational. So when you're thinking about starting a startup, the most important thing to do is do it. Don't delay, don't wait. Because as you get older, it just gets harder. As you get older and there are more life pressures, suddenly the checklist is mortgage, kids, marriage. And once you've got that checklist, it becomes really, really hard. So now is the best time to start up. And if you're toying with an idea, the best thing you can do is to start going with it, to get going with it. The best way to learn about starting a startup is to start a startup. You can't learn about it through reading blog posts, reading books, whatever it may be. The best way to learn is to actually get going.
So deadly sin number 2. One thing we see a lot, and maybe it's just a UK thing, but I don't think so, because we've started to spend a lot more time in Europe and we hear the same thing again and again, which is, if you're going to build a technology startup, the key part is the technology. And yet, often we meet people who are either students or they've graduated and they're kind of thinking about what to do next. And the bit they talk about is the entrepreneurship bit. They want a business card, they want headed notepaper, they want a website, they want a business plan. They want all these things that you might associate with the business side of things, but they don't actually have a business. We always joke that if you meet a student with business cards but no product, you've already met a failed entrepreneur, because you don't need a business card on day one of a startup. The most important thing you can do is find something that people really want, that customers will actually use, and build that for them. It's very, very tempting to kind of see, the kind of stereotype images of people in suits, with briefcases walking down the street and thinking, that's what business is about. And that's what I need to be like if I want to start a company. But actually, if you look at the businesses that have really transformed the world over the last 15 years, they're not businesses that were started by people who focused on being entrepreneurs. They was really built, we think, at least in our industry, by people who focused on building great products with great technology. When Larry and Sergey started Google, they didn't think, right, we better write a business plan. And it's really important that we have really nice business cards that we can give out at conferences. In fact, they built Google because they'd already built great technology while they were doing their PhDs. They'd built the first version of Google. Backrub it was called. Which is probably a good job they didn't stick with that name and switch to Google. But, you know, the same, Mark Zuckerberg was an accidental entrepreneur. He didn't go around saying, I want to be an entrepreneur, I want to be an entrepreneur. He just built a great product that people wanted. And time again, when we look at our most successful founders who we've funded at EF, what we see is they weren't really attracted to being an entrepreneur for its own sake. They were attracted to building great technology, great products that people really wanted to use. And in the process of building those products, they became entrepreneurs. It's always a little bit worrying to us when we meet people who are more interested in being able to say, I am an entrepreneur, than they are in what they're actually an entrepreneur for. One of the questions we ask when we interview candidates for funding is, we don't care what the idea is and we expect the idea will change, but we say, what will be so exciting for you to work on that even when none of your customers want to talk to you and you're not really enjoying it and you know it's cold and you want to just stay in bed and you haven't got a boss so you can stay in bed, what is so exciting to you that you're going to get out of bed anyway, get up and actually build it? Because actually the idea of being an entrepreneur for most people isn't strong enough to get them out of bed in the morning. Actually, you need something, you know, like a burning desire to build something, to solve a problem. And we've seen by far our best founders at EF, the ones who've gone on to raise millions of dollars and, you know, have millions of users, are the ones who had a problem they really wanted to solve. And that's what brought them to EF, and it's what spurs them on now, years later. So that's the second error people make, is that they're far too attracted to the world of business cards and conferences, and they don't think enough about technology and products.
So error number 3, and this I think is probably the one that we find most annoying and hard to deal with. So it's working on the wrong thing for you. Some of you may have heard of this idea of founder idea fit, which is broadly, does the founder have the right skills, expertise, experience, knowledge to be working on a particular idea? Over the last couple of weeks, we've been interviewing for the next cohort of EF, and we've had guys with machine learning PhDs, nanotechnology degrees, physics degrees, whatever it may be, people with experience in financial services or in medicine, a really broad range of people with different backgrounds. It's really surprising for us how many of them say, oh yeah, so I know a ton about this. I'm a complete expert in that. But actually, what I want to do is build a dating app, or build a way for people to find housemates, or build a food delivery service, or build a better way to share textbooks. The problem with those kind of ideas is they don't make the most of your expertise. Anyone can start those ideas. There's a very, very low barrier to entry. And if you think about when you're starting up, there are lots of things that are unknown. You probably don't know who your customer is. You probably don't know how you're going to make money. You probably don't know what the best way to talk to those potential customers are. Lots of unknowns. If you can change unknowns into known things, that's much, much better. So that means, can you use existing experience, existing skills, existing connections that you have to build a startup, rather than starting in a field that you may know nothing about, and that often a lot of other people probably know more about than you. So for example, if you have a background in gaming, it's highly likely that you should probably start a game startup. or if you have a background in machine learning, it's highly likely that you should start something that's related to the work that you've been doing in machine learning. And maybe you don't care about the application of it, and maybe you don't know anything about publishing. So we've got some guys in our last cohort who had done a lot of machine learning while they're at university, and actually they didn't care about what it was applied to, whether it was publishing or whether it was medicine or whatever it may be. But they knew about the technology, and that was what was important. So as long as you have some level of expertise, either in the technology or in the industry, you are already putting yourself in a much better position, much stronger position to do something that is very, very risky, starting a startup. So think about, what do you know? Look to the person next to you. And if you had to compete against them to start a startup, because if you're all bright, young, entrepreneurial things, then you may be competing against each other to some extent. And if they're starting a startup at the same time as you, what would you be better at than them? What's your unique skill, your unique experience that you can use to build your own startup? Because building a startup is really hard, and you want to take any natural advantages that you already have.
So, error number 4, treating it like a job. We always joke at EF that you can tell it's going really, really badly for someone if 6 weeks in, someone comes to our office and says, "Matt, I just can't carry on anymore." They say, "Why?" They say, "I'm just burnt out." It's like, you're 6 weeks in. It's going to take you 10 years to build this company. You're 6 weeks in, so you think, oh, well, maybe they're working 100 hours a week and they're just working too hard, and that's why they're burnt out. And you say, "How hard are you working?" They say, "I'm coming in at 10 a.m. every day and I'm not leaving until 5. It's like, wait a minute. Every day? You mean like Monday to Sunday? No, Monday to Friday. So wait, you're working 35 hours a week and you're burnt out? Oh dear. This is not going to fly. This is not going to work. You should not start a startup if you're not willing, and maybe I'm going to put a lot of you off ever doing it here. You should not start a startup if you're not willing to have it take over your life. I would be absolutely lying to you if I said, start a startup, it's really easy, it's always fun, you're never stressed, it's kind of like you be your own boss, you've got so much freedom. All that, unfortunately, is total bullshit. People say, be your own boss, and what actually happens is you end up with as many bosses as you have customers. People say have loads of freedom, and they're right, you have a freedom about which 23 of the 24 hours in the day to work. You can pick any one of them to sleep anytime. Starting a startup is not easy. The minute it starts to feel like a job, or the minute you start to think of it like just a job that you turn up for, put in the hours and leave, you're kind of already doomed to failure. I should point out here, I'm not talking about all companies. Some people start very successful companies that they always intend to not take very much of their time, and they make enough money to get by, and it's great, and they enjoy that. When we talk about startups, we're not talking about companies like that. We're talking about companies where the founder has an ambition essentially to take over the world. Companies that can go from 0 to 100 million users in a few years. If you want to start one of those companies, you can't treat it like a job. It will take over your life. My wife constantly says that, it's really lucky that it doesn't count as an affair if the other person is a company, because otherwise our marriage wouldn't last very long. Alice and I used to work at a company called McKinsey, which is a big management consultancy, and that's where we met. And McKinsey, you may not have heard of it, but it's like notorious for taking over your life. Like your bosses just make you work the whole time. You come in at 8 a.m., you leave at midnight or 1 a.m., 2 a.m. You work weekends. It totally takes over your life. But one thing it never did for me, at least, was it never took over my brain. It never, even when I was working really hard, I didn't wake up in the night thinking about McKinsey or thinking about making PowerPoint slides, which is what we used to have to do the whole time. It never had a total hold over who I was as a person. And to be totally honest, startups do. EF has way more dominance over my mind than working in a big corporate ever did. I woke up this morning at 2:30 a.m. And I knew I had to get up at 5:30 a.m. to get here anyway. And I just didn't get back to sleep because I was thinking about this interesting problem that we have to solve, really about how we scale EF. And once my brain started ticking over, well, that was it. And I was done for the night. And I didn't get back to sleep. But you know what? If that doesn't really excite you, if the idea of being so obsessed with something that you can imagine that being a good thing rather than a bad thing doesn't excite you, then maybe actually you shouldn't start a startup. Because I think the people who love it most are the people who enjoy becoming totally obsessed with something that's bigger than themselves. There's nothing more exciting to me at EF than the fact that when Alice and I started it, we didn't have an office, and we'd often work out of my flat, and we just had literally no one. And now, there are kind of 60 people in the office, there's kind of 12 people on our team, and, we see all these things happen, and there's nothing more exciting than that. So that's the kind of fourth big error. Don't treat it like a job. Treat it like a mission that's going to take over your life. It's the only way to do it.
So error number 5, not taking enough risk. Building a startup is risky. Everyone knows that. But I think one of the things that people misunderstand is that it's as hard and as risky to build a massive startup as it is to build a very small startup. And what we often see is that people try and make founding a startup safer. They try and minimize the risk that they're going to take. And I think that's why we see people say, oh, it must be easy to start a dating app or a house sharing app or a food delivery app. Those things are going to be easier because there's, I can kind of understand the business model and there's less risk attached. And I think that's often why we see people shying away from using their highly developed and very specialized technical skills and try and go for things that they see that are safer, such as apps. And I suppose often we see people with technical skills say, oh yeah, but I thought, should I start a restaurant? Would that be less risky? The reality is that whatever company you start, it's going to be really, really high risk. And whatever company you're going to start, it's going to take over your life. So much better to start a company where the potential return is in the hundreds of millions rather than in the tens of millions. At EF, we have a slightly unorthodox approach to investing. And as Matt said, people thought we were totally crazy. We invest in the riskiest class of startups possible, because when we invest, there often isn't a startup. Usually there's no company that's been incorporated. The reason that we like to take this kind of risk is because we want to find the people who are crazy enough to believe that they could be in that top 0.01% of people who could build $1 billion business. And this gets bandied around a lot, this whole kind of idea of, can you build $1 billion business? Can you? But actually, in reality, very, very few people can. And we're beginning to be able to identify the kind of people who are crazy enough to think that. And they really, really are crazy, absolutely crazy. And they display particular characteristics. And the main one is they have a really, really high appetite for risk. It's not necessarily completely random risk. I think one of the things we see our best founders do is they say, yes, I'm going to take lots of risk, but that risk is going to be technical risk. It's going to be taking risk around the subject that I know about, which is whatever piece of tech I'm building, whatever product I'm building. And I'm going to push myself to the limit of what I can build. I'm not going to play that bit safe. I'm going to push myself to the limit of what I can build, because if I can build it, this would be game-changing, absolutely game-changing. I don't know if that many of you have read Peter Thiel's book 0 to 1, or if you've read the essay about why you should build a monopoly. Anyone read it? This is essential reading. So Peter Thiel's essay about why you should build a monopoly is a fantastic read about why you should be building these kind of super risky companies that can dominate a market and basically create a monopoly, because that's where the biggest returns are. So when you're thinking about ideas, when you're thinking about what excites you to work on, think about what tech you've built in the past. Think about what pushing that to the boundaries of what you can achieve would look like. And see that as the right way to take risk and the right way to build a really big, really interesting company.
I think a good example of that is if you compare Google to Instagram. So Instagram was a big win and it looks great, but so many people were trying to build photo sharing apps and won. And they won not because of any reason that's easy to identify at the time, but just because that was the one that took off. Whereas, I don't know if anyone remembers using the search engines that existed before Google. But they were terrible. I mean, like, literally the way they did it was by counting the number of times the word was used. So whatever you searched for, you got porn. It was terrible. Like, I mean, these were like awful pieces of technology. And they won by being the better product. It's not easy to be the better product. I mean, Google was a really hard problem. But it's much easier if you're very strong, technically, to build a better product than it is to get lucky on being the one photo sharing app that comes up. Not saying Instagram isn't a great achievement. It's obviously a phenomenal achievement. But take more technical risks. Don't take distribution risk, market risk. Will people want this?
I suppose one example from our cohort from this year, we have a Imperial College computer vision PhD student, and when he started with us, he wanted to build something that would allow people to do better interior decoration in their home, help them find better tables, chairs, pictures. He knows nothing about that at all, but he thought it sounded easy. He thought it sounded like the sort of thing that people would want, but he had no expertise in that space. He's now working on video compression, and it's incredibly technically risky. But he's assembled a fantastic team. I think there's now, almost 5 Imperial PhDs that are going to be working on this. And they're really pushing themselves in terms of what they can build. But if they can build this, that's actually a really interesting opportunity because it's something that's technically hard, really hard to replicate, and very defensible.
Okay, so error number 6. One of the most important things by far when you start a startup is starting it with the right people. Almost no one, not quite no one, but almost no one can truly start a startup by themselves. I actually spent 3 weeks trying to build EF without Alice, and it was probably the worst 3 weeks of my life. The emotional burden of trying to start a company is well, for me was too much, and for nearly every founder we've worked with who's tried to work by themselves, it's just too much. Partly, there's just literally not enough time in the day for one person to do all that work, but partly it's not being able to share that burden of, what are we going to do? No one wants this. You need someone who is as tied, to this company as you are when it feels like things are going wrong. So most people understand this. Most people want a co-founder. And a lot of the reason that people apply to EF is to find a co-founder. One thing we're very clear about is that we're going to put together every 3 months a group of 50 exceptional people who are all looking for co-founders. And that's proved over the last 3 years to be a great way for people to team up. What's really surprising to us, though, and what we've seen many times, particularly actually outside EF, is this. That when people look for co-founders, they very often value the wrong things in co-founders and end up making bad co-founding decisions because they pick or they select for the wrong characteristics. In particular, people with technical backgrounds often think that people without technical backgrounds must be really brilliant at something really important, and therefore they must desperately need a business person to team up with them. Now, I'm not against business people. I guess I'm a business person. That's kind of my background, and it's probably what I know most on. I definitely wouldn't want to go head-to-head with any of you in a programming contest because you would definitely win. So it's not that I don't appreciate the value of business people. But if you think about the very first days of a company, and Alice has already said at EF we specialize in those first 200 days. In the first 200 days, what really matters is being able to understand your customers and build a first version of a product for those people, for those customers that they will want and use. In the past at EF, we used to try and recruit a mixture of people with like sales and marketing backgrounds and people with technical backgrounds. And what we hoped would happen is that they'd team up and make these really well-balanced teams that would, conquer the world. What actually happened was that when we did this, nearly everyone who couldn't program ended up dropping out, and nearly everyone who could program ended up succeeding. And the reason for that is not because business people can't make great companies. It's because if you're building a technology company, if what you're trying to do is build a product that's so good that people, all around the world might end up using it, it's actually extremely hard to make a major contribution in the first 200 days if you can't contribute to that product. It's actually really hard to find enough to do if you can't program. There's not very much sales to do on day one, because what have you got to sell? There's not very much marketing to do on day one, because what have you got to market? There's very little strategy to do, because all the strategy is tied up in the product. There's no finance, because you've got no money. There's no HR, because you've got no team. So all these things that are really useful in the longer run actually aren't so useful at the start. And this is a mistake that we see particularly a lot of people make when they're kind of just starting to think about getting together a team. The classic is we'll meet someone who's got quite an interesting idea, and that we'll say, oh, who are you working with? And they'll say, we've got a team of 7, and one of them's a marketing guy, and one of them's an SEO guy, and one of them's and you go on like this, and you realize they've got this huge team, all of whom have nothing to do, because none of those things are what you need at the start of the startup. And so what we really encourage people to do is 2 things. 1, don't build a big team if you're building a startup. The most important thing you have on your side, the biggest advantage that you have, is that you can move fast. You can move more quickly than a big company you might be competing with. And the reason you can move more quickly is because you're small. You don't have huge bureaucracies that are needed to make decisions. But if you have 7 people in a team when you're building a startup, that actually slows you down an awful lot. You would think that you would be 7 times more productive with 7 people. Actually, you seem to be just a little bit less productive than you would be with 2 people, which is quite extraordinary. So whenever we see that teams that are formed, we always say to the co-founders, what is it that you value in your co-founder that you cannot get yourself, and that is so important that it's worth giving up half your company? That's the way to think about it. When you start a company, we believe at EF very strongly that if you're starting together on day one and there's no money yet in the company and there's no product, you should split equally, because, hey, you're both starting at the same time. So if you're going to split equally, you better be giving that person half your company, because they're going to make exactly the same contribution as you. We often find that people from tech backgrounds undervalue their own skills. They undervalue how crucial their contribution is at the start of starting a company. And so we always encourage people to think, who can you start a company with who you actually respect so much that you're slightly surprised that they're willing to start a company with you? That's the ideal. You want someone who you secretly think is a little bit better than you. And what you really hope is that they secretly think that you're a little bit better than them. And if you can get that balance right, then you end up with an incredibly strong team. But we've seen so many teams succeed. We've seen so many teams break up, so many teams fail, just decide one day that they can't work together anymore. And by far the most common reason is that when they're actually tested by building things together, they realize that they don't actually have that need for each other. They don't believe that the other person can deliver something that they can't deliver. Now, obviously, teams are very complex. They're very human. They're quite emotional. A lot of it comes down to trust and respect and ideas like that. But ultimately, it's very, very easy to respect someone as a co-founder who's making what you see as a huge contribution. And it's almost impossible to respect someone as a co-founder if actually they're not making that contribution. So we recommend, and in fact we force more or less everyone at EF who wants to work together to actually try working together, to test it for at least a couple of weeks before they make any big decisions about assigning shares or signing contracts. None of that. We don't have any paperwork until you've shown us that you can actually work together, because all we end up doing is ripping up the paperwork later, and that's no good. So really, when you're thinking about co-founders, thinking about teams, it's all about who can make a contribution so big that it's worth giving up half the company. And ignoring that and kind of ticking boxes so that you think you've got all the skills that you need in the team, that is one of the biggest errors we see, and that's error number 6.
Final error, final deadly sin. And this may be one that you guys have heard about before. And it's something that we see year after year after year. Assuming demand that's not there. So what does this mean? Let's rewind a little bit. So you're in the early stages of a startup. You think you've identified a problem. You then go away and build the solution to this problem as best as you can. You go away for 6 months, a year, 18 months, and you're still building on the problem, building on the problem. When you finally show that product, show that solution to the customer, what's their response? Well, unfortunately, this is one of the biggest problems for us at EF, and we know that it's something that all early stage startups face, and I think this is one of the real value adds that accelerators and mentors can provide. They will force you to push your product out of the door very quickly. How many of you have heard of an MVP, a minimum viable product? Yeah. So this gets bandied around a lot, and I think it's often misinterpreted. So minimum viable product means the smallest thing that you can build or do that will allow you to see that there's value in your product for the customer. So often people talk about a landing page, you throw up a landing page, and then how many signups can you get within a very short amount of time? And if you've got 1,000 signups, then everyone wants it, and you go away for a year and you build it. Unfortunately, it doesn't work quite like that. And I think that when you're thinking about this MVP, you need to think about value. Does what you're creating, even though it's small, create value for your potential customer? So, for example, a landing page doesn't really create value for anyone. Yes, you can see if people are interested in something, but we've had startups in the past who have had very successful landing pages with a couple of thousand people signing up within 24 hours. But then when they release the product, very, very few of those people sign up. Maybe 2 or 3% actually end up using the product because the landing page doesn't provide any value. So when you're thinking about trying to understand if there's demand for your product, you need to really understand if the thing you're testing is providing value. What this can be is not producing a product at all. And actually, for some of the more technically complicated products that are being produced on EF this year, what we find is that they don't really build very much on EF at all. They really want to. We have to pull their hands away from the keyboards. They really want to get building. But actually what's much more important is going out and talking to customers and understanding whether what they will build will be valuable to them. Often what this means is creating a sort of smoke and mirrors effect of talking to potential big customers who might be big businesses and trying to get an understanding for them that if this product was built, whether they would pay for it or not. And one of the things that we're really, really keen to push our guys on is, will people pay for what you're building? We've seen startups that have done really well when they have a free product, but at the point where they suddenly ask people to pay, it doesn't really provide enough value. And suddenly the product that you've been pushing on and iterating on and developing isn't as valuable as you originally thought. To understand whether somebody wants your product, they need to give up a valuable resource, a scarce valuable resource. So either time or money. So when you're thinking about the product that you want to build, I would encourage you to think about what your MVP is. What's that valuable, small valuable thing that you could do for someone? And it may be that it's not using any technology at all. It may be selling a dream and selling a potential product that you could build and seeing whether you can get a contract with a big company that says, yeah, in 3 months' time, if you've built this, we'll buy it. And that happens fairly regularly, where they say, yeah, 3-6 months' time, if you provide this product, as you've said, we'll pay for that. We'll give you this amount of money. So that then you really know that what you're building, somebody will pay for at the end of it. Or if you're building something consumer-facing, can you find another way to generate cash without actually having to build the product? So, for example, I've just signed up for a service which takes your washing away. They come to your house, they pick up your dirty laundry, they take it away, and then return it the next day for £10, 15 euros. It's a fantastic service, but it's a very early stage startup, And actually, in the early days, those guys were literally pretty much without, the most basic of basic websites with telephone and text and lots of random bits. But basically, the founders running around, delivering the washing, doing the washing themselves, and creating the service, but without actually much of the tech involved, not much product as in the same sense. So think about when you're building your product, if you're building something that you think a big company will like, can you sell it to that company, sell it to a potential company before you've actually built it? Or if you're making something for customers, can you, for direct consumers, can you create a non-tech version that would allow you to test demand? I mean, if you are going to build a dating app, can you do a dating event in person that will allow you to find out whether you can interact and provide something of value to those people before you actually go about building the app? The second important part of this is ship often and ship early. The most important thing is if you are building, is to get your product out in front of people. And the teams that we really struggle with on EF are the ones who really just don't want that feedback. They know their product is perfect and it's the customer that's wrong, it's not them. Unfortunately, that's not the way it works. And when Matt was talking about having lots and lots and lots of bosses, customers will, to some extent, help you shape the product. They don't necessarily dictate what the product will be, but they will help you shape it. And if you build something that people don't want, it's just a waste of time. It's basically a fantasy. So if you really care about building a startup and having a product that people use, the quicker that you can get it in front of those people and make sure that you are building something that they want, the better. And this is the number one problem that we see startups have time and time again. People know about it. People know that this is hard, but they still don't do it. They still want to keep their product close to them. So this has been, I suppose, a super quick introduction to the way that we think about startups. I suppose in many ways we are very serious about startups. We know that there's a lot going on in Paris and in London and across Europe that celebrates startups and celebrates the kind of building of startups and the community around startups. That's fantastic. But what we want are the people who are have a laser-like focus on building a startup and who want to be part of this kind of elite community who are obsessive about building technically advanced, technically complicated products that can become very big companies. We run a program 3 times a year in March, July and September that is for Europe's kind of elite technical talent. We primarily take graduates alongside a couple of recent graduates, so people like you straight out of university at the undergrad, master's and PhD level. They often come to us with a little or some real world experience, but they come with very strong technical skills and often a particular area of interest that they want to build on. Applications are open now. We recruit all year round. I know that some of you are looking for internships as well, and we do internships over the summer with our alumni companies. So if you're interested in working in really, really early stage startups, so at the stage where it's still 3-4 people maybe, if you want that kind of experience that is pretty scrappy, pretty close to the bone, but you'll probably get a lot of responsibility, then you should drop us an email. I'm Alice. Matt's Matt. Please drop us a line, either tweet at us or send us an email. We'd love to hear from you. We're really, really impressed by what Ecole 42 is doing. We think it's absolutely amazing. We'd love something like this in London. So we'd love to get to know some of you guys better and we'd love to come back in the future. I think we've got pizza outside.
We have. A really important point though is Alice has a lot more Twitter followers than I do. So if you could all follow me, please, and not follow Alice.
This is very unfair.
That would be great. So we do have pizza next door and drinks and stuff, but I think we have like 5 minutes-ish for some questions. If anyone has any questions, very happy to answer them. If you want to ask us questions one-on-one, we'll be eating the pizza too, so you can grab us in there. But does anyone have any general questions? Did we just speak so fast that everyone's like, what on earth were they saying? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so every 6 months we release the ones that we have with us to the world. Sorry, the question, by the way, was can you get a description of the companies doing EF? I don't know if everyone heard. So every 6 months we have what's called a demo day, where we'll get about 200 investors in a room together, and then each of the startups will pitch what they do to the investors so that they can hopefully raise some money and be able to carry on doing what they're doing and grow. So the 20 that have already done that are on the website, and then the next 20, which are with us now, they are doing that in 3 weeks, which is quite scary for us. And then they'll be on the website too.
I'm not sure if this was a but I was thinking more particularly in the sense of doing an internship with them.
Yes. So if you go to the website, there should be a section called internships. I think. I don't run the website, neither does Alice, so we're always wrong about what's on there. But I'm pretty sure there's a section called internships. And
it might be Founder School.
It might be called Founder School. Basically, we think the best way to learn to be a founder, other than starting a company yourself, is to go work for one startup. So we call it Founder School. So if you go on the Founder School section, there should be instructions on how to apply. And we have a team that looks after that. And they will definitely, if it's not on the website, they will definitely get back to you with a list of who they are.
For the internships, it's in London or anywhere else in Europe?
It is in London. So most of our startups are still based in London or in the west coast of the US. I mean, I think that part of the benefit of being in London is there's a lot going on in London right now, as there is in Paris. But I think being part of the Founder School internship, not only are you working in a very early stage startup, but you're also part of a group of 14 or 15 other interns who are all interested in starting startups, all come from similar backgrounds. And we're beginning to see sort of people co-founding with people they meet on the internship program and building those kind of relationships. So it's, I suppose, sometimes being an intern can be a relatively lonely experience. But as part of this kind of program, you get a body of people who are going through the same thing as you are.
But we do have one in Greece.
If anyone who wants some sun.
Before the success of EF, did you do any mistakes?
Oh my goodness.
How long do you have?
We made every mistake it's possible to make. I mean, You
see these mistakes up here? These were the 7 mistakes we made in the first year.
It's so embarrassing. When we look, we have in our office a copy of the first leaflet that we had printed when we wanted to get people to do EF. I mean, the first mistake we made was printing a leaflet because it was totally unnecessary. We printed 5,000 of them. I think we managed to give away 600 in 3 months. And so we had piles and piles and piles of these really expensive leaflets that were on, beautiful paper. And they were just rubbish. They were awful. The kind of, it was horrible. I can't even talk about it. It's too embarrassing. I mean, one major thing that we had to learn was at McKinsey, there was always lots of money. So like whatever you needed to do, someone else just paid for. And then we left and we paid for everything ourselves. And we were suddenly like, oh, wow, this is very different. Like now we would never, I dread to think how much we spent on those leaflets, but we would never do that now.
I think one of the mindset mistakes that we made was we thought that if we worked, when we left university, we thought that if we worked in a big company, it would teach us how to start a small company. It'd be the same thing, but smaller. And with the leaflet printing and with finding offices and getting a logo and all these other embarrassing things that we shouldn't have spent time on, we were trying to replicate what we knew, which was big company. A startup is not a small version of a big company. It's a completely different entity. In a big company, you have a known customer, a known product, and a known way to make money. In a startup, often you don't have any of those things. And so I think it was part of the reason that we wanted to start EF and why we're so passionate about this is because I think there's this misunderstanding that you need to go and work at Google or Facebook or Microsoft or a bank or whatever it may be, because then you'll learn how business works and like how to build a company. But a 10,000 or 40,000 person company is so different from a 2-person company. And it took us about 6 months to sort of shake off our big company mindset. So I think that was a bit of a mistake.
I think the one thing we really did right, though, was that we did just start. So there's some of you will have heard of a guy called Reid Hoffman. He started LinkedIn, which obviously now is a pretty big company. He was also one of the guys who built PayPal. He was one of the first investors of Facebook. You know, he's seen a lot of successful companies. And he says, and we always remember this line whenever we feel too bad, he says, if you're not embarrassed by the first version of the product that you release, you waited too long. And like, so true for EF, because the first version we released was so embarrassing. But we got so much valuable feedback from that. I remember we started EF in August 2011, and we were so worried the whole of that autumn and winter that no one would want to do it. And I remember going to see this investor who's very famous in the UK and saying to her, you know, looking back, what I realized we did wrong was if we'd given ourselves one more year, it would have been great, because then we'd have got, you know, we'd have just had everything ready. And she said, no, it's the one thing you did right was not wait, because the only way to learn is to see what people actually think and get that feedback, even when it hurts. So the one thing I'd say we did do right was we launched. But other than that, you can pretty much guarantee we did everything wrong.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Yeah.
Hi. Hello. Thank you very much for your presentation. It was very great. I have a question for you. Basically, you're talking about about getting reviews about your product or your MVP. So how are you supposed to do that? Because basically, I'm trying to do a startup right now, and I have an MVP, but I don't know how to get review, and I really don't like the fact to go outside and ask people, hey, what do you think about this? Because usually they don't give a fuck, or I don't know how to do it. So I'm at the point where I'm wondering if I need a business guy or this kind of guy who know how to do it.
Who are your customers?
Public people, like mostly girls between 20 and 30.
What's the broad idea? Like, what is it?
It's like a shopping marketplace, but where there is absolutely no marketing. It's like review before marketing, where we're skipping the marketing, all the marketing stuff, and we have an algorithm to get like the best product for people, and so we're working like that on that.
And do you have any users at the
clear,
moment?
Sorry.
Do you have any users at the moment?
No, because actually I don't have like product on my website.
Sure.
Okay, so it's just to talk to people.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think there's probably two things that I would think about. One, people always undervalue their network. So I think networking is often seen as a dirty word, but your first degree connections, your second degree connections, and your third degree connections are really useful, because you're right, random person on the street probably doesn't give a fuck and probably doesn't want to talk to you. But I bet that in your friendship group, in your family circle, in your parents' friends, there will be women of that age, and that you may not know them personally, but they're probably only one person away. And you need to get over that really high level of embarrassment that says, hey, can I speak to your daughter or to your wife or to your cousin? People often shy away from using those personal contacts because it's embarrassing, right? You're putting yourself out there saying, hey, I've made this thing. Do you want to shred it for me? So push past that point of embarrassment and ask your friends and family, because those people, if they really don't want to talk to you, then no one's going to want to talk to you. Use that network and use their connections. Every time you meet one person, ask them who they can introduce you to. So every time you meet one of these women who's in that special age category, I bet they've got friends in that age category who think in a similar way to them. So every person you meet, ask for at least 1, 2, 3 introductions. So that's one way of doing it. And then the second way is to think where these people already exist. So what hubs already exist that they're being attracted to? So when we were, for example, first starting EF, we could turn up to universities and try and get people to come and see us. But, we had no brand. I mean, why would people do that? Much easier to go where people already exist, where there's a magnet already pulling them in. So if this is about shopping, then are there shopping malls that you can go to? Or are there online forums that talk about shopping? Or online magazines that talk about this kind of thing? There will be both physical and virtual places where these people already go to. So yeah, talking to people on the street, just randomly, probably not a good idea. But if you can find a filtered place where people have been filtered to get there to some extent, so they have to like shopping, they are the right age, they're female, those places exist, but you do have to go up to them and talk to them.
One thing I would add is that I think what you need to do is remember that no one actually likes giving feedback on ideas. That's not a thing. Like, think how many times you would choose to spend time giving feedback on an idea. If you frame it like that, if that's the question, people, as you say, just like, whatever. The best way to get feedback on an idea is to find a way to actually road test the idea. So 2 years ago, we had a company that was trying to sell shoes to women in exactly the same age group. And they started literally by doing what you were saying. Like, they were going into Starbucks, trying to find women and being like, you, what do you think of my app? And, you know, I think they got kicked out of a lot of Starbucks, right? But what they did instead in the end was they put up posters not saying, please come and give me feedback on my idea, but hey, we're going to do, I can't remember, it's like a shoe, it was all about shoes. And it was like, we're going to do a shoe show and tell at this bar at this time, and we're going to get a bunch of, something like this, right? It was like, we're going to get a bunch of shoes and like compare like the latest fashions. And then the people who turned up for that, they didn't say, oh, you're actually here to give me feedback on the app. They just, while they were doing the talking about shoes, they just showed them the app and listened to what they said organically. And the reason that's important is that if you say to someone, here's my amazing idea, what do you think about it? What's the most common response? It's amazing. People don't like hurting other people's feelings, usually. Do you think my idea is good? No, I think it's terrible. No one ever says that. And so the most dangerous thing that can happen to you as a founder is getting the polite answer instead of the true answer. So almost never ask people what they think of your idea. Almost never ask people what they think about your app or your website or your product. Instead, find an organic way for them to use it. And then when they say, oh, it's really annoying, it doesn't do this, or, but wait, how do I do that? Or what's this for? Then you're getting real feedback because they don't know that they're hurting your feelings. And that's what you want. You want to find a way for you to be tortured without them knowing that they're torturing you. That works really well.
It also does have to be you. You have to do this. So if you outsource this to someone else, what you're going to hear is second-degree feedback. And it can be really useful to get feedback where two people, both co-founders, are sat in, because I'll come out of it and go, oh my God, they loved it. And Matt will come out of it and be like, oh my God, they hated it. And then you can actually pick apart what they were saying and why you interpreted it differently. I'd be pretty scared if Matt was just telling me directly what he thought and how he interpreted it. We've also had experiences in the past, not actually directly on EF, but with students that we've worked with, where someone technical has brought on someone businessy. The businessy person has said, right, I'll go out, I'll go and get feedback. And then has said, well, unless you give me more equity, I'm not going to tell you what people said. So don't set yourself up for a fall. I mean, that's a kind of unusual situation. But as the founder of this company, you need to understand your customer. You need to know where, know how she thinks, know what she likes to wear, know what she likes to talk about, because that's the only way you're going to build the product that she wants.
All right, thank you very much.
Maybe time for one more before pizza? Oh no,
Everyone's just like, pizza!
I've ruined it now. It's like no more before pizza.
It's hard, really hard.
We've done it 3 times? 4 times?
Yeah.
We've done it 4 times out of 40. One failed completely because he just couldn't cope with it. The other one seemed like it was going really well for a while, and then she brought in another co-founder because it was actually too much. We've got 2 with us now. One is failing completely, and the other one is just about to bring in 2 others, because I wouldn't let it stop you starting, but I would make it your number 1 priority once you start. Does that make sense?
You're much more likely to get a co-founder if you've got something up and running. And also what we find is difficult is if you are looking for a co-founder and you find someone else who's looking for a co-founder, the only mutual interest that you have is co-founding. And actually, you probably aren't interested in building the same startup. So get building, get something started, show people what you're interested in, show people that you're an amazing co-founder as well, because look how much you've done, and then bring someone on, because it's really hard. The emotional burden.
All right. Thanks so much for coming. Really appreciate you giving us so much time. It was very fun.